Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're looking into the disappearance of Mary Shotwell Little. She went missing October 14th, 1965 from Atlanta, Georgia. She was 25 years old. It says she was 5'6" and 120 pounds. It says she purchased groceries after work and then met a co-worker for dinner at the Piccadilly cafeteria in the Lenox Square shopping center in the upscale Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta. Mary was reportedly in good spirits at the time and spoke happily about her married life. She walked back to her car after dinner at around 8 p.m. Mary has never been heard from again. A gas station in Charlotte showed Little's car had been used in the early morning of October 15th, just a few hours after she was last seen at Lenox Square. The car was used again several hours later in Raleigh with what appeared to be Little's signature. And I did find an unidentified female in Lewisville. So I thought, if she went missing from Atlanta and then her car was used in Charlotte and then Raleigh, that the person in Lewisville could be her, but it could be a lot of other people, I'm sure, too. Let's see. She had brown hair, light brown hair, green eyes, also described as hazel, discoloration on her left arm, and this explains what she was wearing: a white London fog raincoat and an olive green sheath dress printed with white flowers, set of keys, and a John Romaine handbag. She had glasses, flats, platinum wedding ring, a solitaire engagement ring, a women's college of the University of North Carolina class ring, yellow gold, and a scarab bracelet. She was driving a 1965 Mercury Comet that was gray and also described as metallic pearl gray with Georgia license plate number 2829. There are some photos of her. This is the person I found that was unidentified, but it says that they're American Indian, Alaskan Native, so that makes it sound like it was probably not her, but she was 25 and 5'6", and this person was estimated to be 23 to 25 years old and about 5'4". And this person was found by a group of horseback riders adjacent to the banks of the Yadkin River, discovered July 3rd, but not reported until July 7th. And it doesn't show any clothing as being there with them or miscellaneous items. And not recognizable, partial skeleton parts only. And like I said, there's a map. She went missing from here, and her card was used in Charlotte as well as Raleigh. So there's where Lewisville is, which means, it's probably not her. But I feel like when you know that somebody's missing and you see an unidentified person, I think it helps you to relate, especially if you have information. I hope that if somebody has information, even if they're not sure if it's relevant, they're not sure if it's important, that this helps them to realize that it could be important. And any information that you have, you should come forward and you should give it to authorities. The phone number for the Atlanta Police Department is listed as 404-546-4235. Again, that's 404-546-4235. And you could email them. You could email the police department, the sheriff's department, and a detective if you like. You could write a letter if you choose. But like I said, if you have any information and you're not sure if it's relevant or important, please give them that information and let them decide what's relevant and what's important. Sometimes people will get information, they'll hear somebody drinking and talking, and they won't know if it's true. They'll feel like, but, you just never know. And here's some more information I found online about the case. This website talks about it. It says, over 52 years ago, in the fall of 1965, Mary Shotwell Little disappeared from the Lenox Square parking lot in Atlanta, Georgia. It remains the most famous missing person case in Atlanta history. I didn't know that. Jim Ponder, the FBI liaison with the local law enforcement, was puzzled from the beginning. There were a lot of things about this case that never made sense, he said. October 14, 1965, a young bank secretary, Mary Shotwell Little, met a girlfriend at Lenox Square for dinner. The next morning, she did not show up for work, and her boss was worried. She had several recent strange phone calls and received flowers from a stranger. Her car was found at the mall. It was covered with red dust, and her panties were found on the floorboard. Her car had been driven 41 miles. Very quickly, the newspapers and TV reporting reached a panic level. The Atlanta police and the FBI assigned their best investigators to the case. No clues were found until several weeks later. APD was notified that Mary's gas credit card was used in Raleigh and Charlotte. The lead detective, Lieutenant Jack Perry, flew to North Carolina. At both gas stations, the attendants remembered a young woman who looked hurt and was bleeding. There were two men with her, and she would not get out of the car. Lieutenant Perry could not find any more leads on Mary's whereabouts. The case dragged on with no new leads until 18 months later. A friend of Mary, Diane Shields, was found murdered and stuffed in her car trunk in East Point. Both girls had worked at the bank and had several of the same roommates. The panic and fear started all over again. No arrests were made in either case. For just over 50 years, both cases are still unsolved. $1,000 missing reward. And then there's a newspaper article if you want to pause it and read it. And you can see the photo better. So, the citizens and Southern National Bank will pay $1,000 as a reward to the first person furnishing information leading to the knowledge of the whereabouts of Mrs. Mary Shotwell Little, an employee of the bank. Mrs. Little was last seen at approximately 8 p.m. October 14, 1965, at Lenox Square Shopping Center in Atlanta, Georgia. She is 5'6", weighs 120 pounds, has hazel green eyes and light brown hair. She was wearing a long-sleeved olive green cotton d'Acron print dress with small white figures. She carried a white London fog raincoat in a brown burlap and leather John Romaine brand purse. Mrs. Little's blood-stained automobile, a metallic gray 1965 Comet, Georgia license plate ID 2829, was discovered shortly after noon on October 15, 1965, parked in the yellow 32 section of the Lenox Square parking lot. A decal reading Association of Citadel MEM member 1965 to 66 is pasted on the right side of the car's windshield. Several articles of Miss Little's underclothing were in the car, but articles still unaccounted for include her purse, raincoat, shoes, platinum wedding band, solitaire engagement ring, class ring from the Women's College of the University of North Carolina, a scarab bracelet, and the ignition key to the car. If you have any information that might aid to the search of Mrs. Little, please contact the Atlanta Police Department Homicide Squad. Area code 404, telephone 522-7363. This offer is limited to persons furnishing information prior to February 1st, 1966. Payment of this reward will be made upon the final determination by the citizens and Southern National Bank of the person or persons entitled to this reward. Jim Ponder, the FBI liaison with the local law enforcement, was at Atlanta Police Headquarters downtown when a wrecker hauled in the car. Jop, as his friends called him after his initials, was a South Carolinian who had served in the Navy during World War II and been wounded in the D-Day invasion. He had been a special agent since 1947, matching wits with Klansmen, Soviet spies, and mob bosses. Given the possibility of an interstate kidnapping, he unofficially joined the investigation and sent a teletype to Washington reporting what was known. He was puzzled from the start. There was a lot of things about this case that never made sense, he says. Two members of the Atlanta Police Department's identification unit inspected the vehicle. They found a fine coat of red dust on the exterior, as if the comet had been on a dirt road. They also found blood in several places on the driver's door, near the handle, on the inside window of the passenger side, smeared over the vinyl of the front seats. A few grass clippings were stuck in dried blood where the passenger's head would have rested. Carefully rolled together and placed between the seats was a set of women's undergarments, girdle, slip, panties, speckled with the tiny drops of crimson. On the floorboard lay a black brassiere and a section of stocking that had been cut neatly, as if by a knife. Tests indicated the blood probably was Little's. The undergarments definitely were hers and had been worn recently. There was something about the scene that didn't add up. The crime technician thought. Bill Moore of the identification unit wondered if the smearing hadn't been a ploy to exaggerate the amount of blood. Larry Howard of the State Crime Lab seemed to agree, telling Moore that despite the gory display, there was no more blood than you'd get from a nosebleed, but maybe she smeared it around just to make sure that people knew that she needed help. Or maybe she was being dragged about the car, you don't know. Anyway, she might have smeared it on purpose, but the public pitches in. In the days ahead, thousands of people enlisted in the largest search Atlanta had ever seen. Pilots scanned the area looking for signs of a body. Military reservists scoured the wood around Lenox. Even jail inmates were pressed into the hunt. Reward posters offering $1,000 and then $3,000 went up around the state. The city's top-ranked radio station, WSB, and WQXI, Quixie, and Dixie, asked residents within a 20-mile radius of Lenox to check their property for the personal items missing from Little's car. A corner of police headquarters soon resembled a thrift shop, with piles of clothing, purses, and other items of female apparel. Ponder spent days exploring the woods and side roads along I-85, a relatively new foreland then known as the Northeast Expressway. We searched old abandoned wells and everything you could think of, he says. None of the efforts paid off. In fact, publicity became something of a burden as police had to check out all leads, well-intentioned and otherwise. Then it shows a map in the last sightings. Over the months, the leads dried up. On the first anniversary of Little's disappearance in 1966, police admitted they were no closer to finding her than they had been a year before. They'd even resorted to consulting a psychic. Then in the spring of 1967, the killing of another young woman brought the missing bride back into the news, if only because of the eerie similarities. Diane Shields was fought. Okay, so eerie similarities to Mary Shotwell Little's case. Over 50 years ago, in the spring of 1967, Diane Shields was found murdered, which brought back the painful memories of the unsolved case of the missing bride, Mary Shotwell Little, into the news due to the eerie similarities. The 20-year-old victim, Diane Shields, had worked in Little's office in downtown Atlanta and had lived with some of her roommates. Hearing about the killing the next day, Clint Chafin, superintendent of Atlanta detectives, told East Point Police, "That sounds like our Mary Shotwell Little case." Diane Shields in some ways followed in the footsteps of Mary Shotwell Little, then was found murdered. This says she jumped into her vehicle and locked the door as the pursuer, a thin man with a brown crew cut grabbed the handle. "If you're going to get in my car, you're crazy," she told him. He tapped the window. "Your back tire is low." May 19, 1967, Shields left work in her blue and white Chevy Impala. She never made it home. Diane Shields was a pretty blonde secretary from Gunnerville, Alabama, transferred into personnel after Little vanished. She occupied Mary's old desk and befriended her former colleagues. For a time, she roomed with some of them in their Buckhead duplex. She eventually moved out to live with her sister in College Park and took a job as a receptionist with another company downtown. On May 19, 1967, Shields left work in her blue and white Chevy Impala. She never made it home. East Point police spotted the car at 2:30 a.m. near the drive-in window of a laundry on Sullivan Road. Blood was dripping from the rear end. Finding the keys in the ignition, they opened the trunk to discover Shields' body crammed upside down between a spare tire and a cardboard box. Among other things, the box contained a copy of Betty Crocker's New Dinner for Two the receptionist had planned to marry in July. Shields was fully clothed and had not been sexually assaulted, nor had she been robbed. She was still wearing a diamond engagement ring. A scarf and a piece of paper had been stuffed down her throat, as if to silence her. Hearing about the killing the next day, Clint Chafin, superintendent of Atlanta detectives, told East Point police, "That sounds like our Mary Little case. Shotwell, it's supposed to be Shotwell. Little case." His hunch intensified when it came out that Shields had received roses at the bank and pretended they were anonymous, just like Little's. They weren't. They came from a babysitting client. The news touched off several days of jittery speculation that the Rose killer was loose in Atlanta. The parallels were enough to scare some women who had roomed with Shields and Little. On the weekend after the murder, two of them phoned Ponder in terror and asked if they could come, the agent's house. "My wife and I sat up with them in the living room," he remembers. "They were scared to death. They were especially leery of one of their co-workers, although they couldn't tell Ponder why she would want to harm them. As it turned out, she was as frightened as they were." Ponder thought the similarities in the Little and Shields cases were mere coincidences. On his recommendation, the FBI stayed out of the second investigation. Most of the police who worked the homicide disagreed with his assessment. To this day, Melvin Banks, East Police Chief Detective on the case, believes that someone implicated in the internal investigation at CNS was responsible for Shields' death. "They're connected, no question," he says, but East Point was never able to make an arrest. As with Little, the case is nowhere to be found. There was one other potential connection between Shields and Little that was never reported. Shields told her closest friend back home in Gunnersville that she was working undercover with the police trying to solve the disappearance of a woman named Mary. They want me to work with them so we can close this case." Others recall that Shields was uncharacteristically secretive in the months before she died, not showing up for appointments and vanishing for hours without explanation. None of the surviving detectives knows of any involvement by Shields in the Little investigation. Perhaps Jack Perry, Atlanta's lead on the case, gave her his card and asked her to keep her eyes open, since she was working in Little's office and living with Little's roommates. Perhaps he asked her to do more. He never said. And then we have the Charlie Project, and there's a picture of a car. And she was born January 14th in 1940. So, Mary was a secretary at CNS Bank in Atlanta, Georgia in 1965. The bank is now called Nations Bank. She had married Roy Little, a bank examiner, 6 weeks prior to her disappearance. Roy was out of town on October 14th, training to become an auditor, but was going to return the next day. Mary planned a party to welcome his return. She purchased groceries after work and then met a co-worker for dinner at the Piccadilly cafeteria in the Lenox Square shopping center in the upscale Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta. Mary was reportedly in good spirits at the time and spoke happily about her married life. She walked back to her car after dinner at around 8 p.m. She's never been heard from again. Mary did not show up for work the next morning and did not call in sick. Her boss discussed her absence with a coworker she dined with the previous evening. Mary's coworker knew that Mary's new metallic pearl gray 1965 Mercury Comet was the Georgia license plate 2829 was parked in a lot near Lenox Square from the previous evening's dinner. A photograph of the Comet is posted with this case summary. Initially, the car could not be located by security guards, but by the time Mary's bank supervisor arrived at Lenox Square, the car was in plain sight in the yellow 32 section where it was supposed to be. There was a coating of red dust on the car's exterior, as if it had been driven on a dirt road. 4 bags of groceries were found inside the vehicle, along with Coke bottles and a package of Kent cigarettes, which were Mary's preferred brand. There was also a slip, panties, a girdle, a bra, and a single stocking. Most of the items had been neatly folded and placed in the console between the front bucket seats, but the brassiere and the stocking were on the floor. The stocking had been cut, probably by a knife. The underwear was Mary's and appeared to have been worn recently. Mary's outer clothes, purse, coat, jewelry, and her car keys were missing and have never been found. Blood was speckled on the undergarments and smeared on the steering wheel, the driver's side door near the handle, the inside window of the passenger side, and on the front seats. Testing proved it was probably Mary's blood. There was only a very small amount, about as much blood as would come from a nosebleed. Some police officers were of the opinion that the scene had been staged due to the great smearing of the small quantity of blood. There was an unidentified fingerprint in the blood on the steering wheel. Investigators learned that Mary's gasoline credit card had been used twice in North Carolina on October 15th, the day following her disappearance. The first time was at an Esso station in Mary's hometown of Charlotte. The second time was at another Esso in Raleigh. Attendants at both stations recalled seeing a woman who appeared to have a minor injury to her head and was blood-stained on her head and legs. Both workers told authorities that the woman was traveling with 1 or 2 unshaven, middle-aged men who seemed to be commanding her. This really bothers me that they didn't call the police. The woman appeared to be trying to hide her face from the attendants, and she did not ask anyone for help. Well, of course she didn't. The credit card had been used in the early morning hours of October 15th in Charlotte and approximately 12 hours later in Raleigh. This puzzled investigators. Not only was Charlotte Mary's hometown and the city where her family resided, but Raleigh was only 2 or 3 hours away by car. The long span of time between credit cards usage seems strange considering the short traveling distance between the two cities. Authorities speculate that perhaps whoever had Mary was trying to lead the investigation away from Atlanta. The signatures on the credit card slips read Mrs. Roy H. Little, Jr., and appeared to have been Mary's handwriting. Using Roy's mileage logs and Mary's odometers, investigators estimated that the car had been driven only 41 miles that could not be accounted for. Another odd angle of Mary's case emerged when the license plate on her Mercury Comet turned out to be a Charlotte, North Carolina plate that had been stolen in mid-October. Mary's car was legal in Georgia and had been fitted with the proper tags. Investigators believe that the stolen plate was a clue as to why her vehicle had not been located by Lenox Square security before her bank supervisor drove to the lot and discovered her car himself. Authorities believe that whoever drove Mary's car to the lot may have kept it hidden on the night of her disappearance, only to return it to its initial parking spot later. This theory has never been proven. If the car was in fact moved, it would have been at about the same time that Mary was seen in North Carolina. A $20,000 ransom demand was made for Mary after news about the credit card slips came out. An anonymous caller told Roy to go an overpass in the Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina, and find further instructions posted on a sign. An FBI agent went to the location of Roy's place and found a blank piece of paper stuck to the sign. The caller did not contact the Little family again and has not been identified. The ransom demand is suspected to be a hoax. Police investigated Roy for possible involvement in his wife's disappearance. Her former roommates did not like him, and some refused to attend their wedding because of it. Roy reportedly did not seem to care much about Mary's disappearance. Several times he refused to take a lie detector test. However, he had a solid alibi for the time of her disappearance and nothing to gain from her death, and there were no signs of trouble in the marriage. Roy has never been charged with any wrongdoing in connection with Mary's case. There was some speculation that Mary's disappearance might have been connected to a sex scandal at her place of employment around the time she vanished. The bank had hired a former FBI agent to investigate claims of lesbian sexual harassment and possible prostitution on the property. Mary apparently knew about the scandal, but it was not now believed to have anything to do with her disappearance. Friends told investigators that Mary had been receiving unsettling phone calls at work during the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She apparently gave some indications to the caller that she was married and could no longer visit with the unknown person, but he or she was welcome to visit her. The caller's identity remains a mystery. Mary also received flowers from a secret admirer in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The bouquets were traced to a florist near Mary's residence, but the purchaser identity remains unknown. Mary never shared the details of the strange phone calls or discussed the flowers with anyone. According to some of her friends, she was fearful of being home alone or driving her car unaccompanied in the weeks prior to October 14th. She did not explain why she felt unsafe. A few days before she disappeared, Mary insinuated to her coworkers that she had something important to tell them. She never revealed what it was. In May 1967, 18 months after Mary vanished, another young woman who worked in the same office was murdered. Diane Schild was last seen leaving work in her blue and white Chevy Impala at 2:30 a.m. the next day. The car was found near a laundry on Sullivan Road in Atlanta with Schild's body inside the trunk. She was fully clothed and had not been sexually assaulted, and she was still wearing her diamond engagement ring. She had died of suffocation. A scarf had been shoved down her throat. Police speculated that Mary and Schild's cases might be connected due to the similarities in their disappearances and the fact that the women worked together, but eventually that theory was discarded. Schild's homicide, like Mary's disappearance, remains unsolved. The police file concerning Mary's case vanished sometime in the years following her 1965 disappearance. Her father died in 1979, but her mother is still alive and has never stopped looking for her. Some police officers who investigated Mary's case do not believe foul play was involved. They think Mary staged her disappearance for unknown reasons. Other investigators believe Mary was abducted. A woman reported being accosted by a man in the Lenox Square shopping center parking lot shortly before Mary would have been walking to her car. Some authorities believe the man had something to do with Mary's disappearance. He has never been identified. Mary's case remains active and unsolved. So if you have any information, even if you're not sure if it's true, if you heard it while somebody was talking and drinking, you just let the authorities know, where you got the information, and let them decide what's relevant or important. Please don't forget to pray for her family and her loved ones. Have a blessed day. Feel free to leave comments. Bye-bye.